It is the morning of March 25th, 2025, and I am still here in sunny San Antonio, Texas, today to see one of my new favorite authors, the wonderful Isa Arsén. And I'm not fronting when I say this. Isa is the platonic ideal as a conversation partner for this project. When I was dreaming up books on the bed, wondering what I hoped for this project, the type of people I hope to include, Isa embodies everything about that ideal. And it's also ideal to how I found her, which is accidentally when I was looking, but not looking. You know what I mean? Kind of like with Natachi Mamade Gray in New Mexico. When I heard about Elizabeth Crook and fell in love with her books, and I knew I was going to come to Texas at some point to interview her, it just got me thinking, who are these other slept-on Texas authors that I need to know about? And so you go to the local archives of newspapers, other publications, look for events that are going on in the cities in which these people live, and lo and behold, after a certain amount of time, here is Isa Arsén right in front of me. And so I started with her debut novel, Shoot the Moon. And let me tell you what, I knew right then and there I was going to have to reach out to her and make this work. Honestly, I would have shifted the entire schedule of events. I would have done it a different week, a different month, a different year if I had to, just so that I could include Isa Arsén in Books on the Bed. So I'm really glad it worked out first time around. And it is so apparent that Isa has found something that is really difficult to find for most people. And it is that meeting point, that joining of all of these interests, things you love, curiosities. And she's found that, and what she creates comes from it. That is evident in her first novel, Shoot the Moon, and even more evident in her new novel, which just dropped in January, The Unbecoming of Margaret Wolf. I feel like, if anything, she's doubled down on this self-knowledge and self-honesty and wrote another incredible book. And I feel really fortunate to talk to her about this because I know what this conversation is going to be like. It's why I wanted to be here so badly. It's like you could talk about 1,000 things in a 1-hour conversation, and all of that makes sense. And there's no hiding what you love or what you're curious about. No one's going to have to front or pretend or shy away from themselves to be different with each other. I mean, this is just going to be one of those conversations that my brain and my heart needs. And Isa is one of those people that can give it to you because she is just so curious. There's the composing and music, obviously literature, and being a novelist, but her job as a dialogue engineer is super unique, and she shares my love of landscapes, and especially New Mexico and northern New Mexico and places that are off the beaten path, hidden from plain view. Also, she lives in San Antonio. I mean, you can't be a slept-on author and not live in a slept-on city. And that's what San Antonio is to me. No surprise that Naomi, Shehabnai, and Isa Arsén live here. Wouldn't expect anything else of them. Definitely not New York or LA. Impossible. But anyway, I'm really excited for you to hear this conversation. I can guarantee 100% no one else has chosen these 6 books. But I really do believe if you read her novels, and if you just look at her life, and what she's done, who she's become, I think in there you're going to find a lot of wisdom and the keys to being who you are in this world. I think a person like Isa can give us the courage to do that. And I don't think there's more high praise I can say for an author. Similar to rappers like Ross Sion of Common Market and Gio of Blue Scholars. Similar to Willa Cather and Eudora Welty and many other authors. Similar to some athletes, like San Antonio's own Tim Duncan. wasn't fronting for anybody, trying to be anybody else. And that's why I loved him. And so I would say it doesn't matter if you're double Isa's age, or half her age, or her age. She can teach you something about life. And at the very least, she'll give you some of the best hours spent reading her books. Her stories are incredible. So I'm going to find a way to cool down from this sweltering March Texas heat before I head over to see Isa. And I hope you enjoy this conversation. Thank you for listening. You're listening to Books on the Bed, where I travel through the country asking our hosts, if I came to your town and stayed at your house, what books would you put on my bed? Each host will share 6 books for me to carry with me on the journey of my life. And I'm here to share those books with you. As we go, we're building a digital library with every book put on every bed across the country. And who knows, maybe someday, the world. We are trying to share as many diverse stories as possible to part a curtain between us and bring us closer to each other. We hope these books and conversations make a meaningful difference in your life. Thank you for listening and being with us on this journey. I was really excited about this because you're someone you're like Meredith McCarroll, who was the last episode that came out, and she is like the most strange, diverse interest that all yet make sense in a person.
Yep.
So that's like, that's why I tend to gravitate toward people that aren't as explainable.
Mm-hmm. I like that term. It's a very kind term for it.
Well, both in terms of what you write.
Yeah.
And how you live. I just don't like predictable people.
That's nice.
I don't like people that choose a lane because they feel like then everybody else will be able to make sense of them.
Yeah.
I always talk about Jim Minnick, who's a lesser-known poet in Virginia, Smith County, in Appalachian, Virginia. He's written an oral history book on the deadliest tornado in Kansas history.
A whole history on one tornado. Ooh.
Yep. An oral history. So he got like the down and dirty from the town. A memoir about he and his wife starting a blueberry farm. Like just moving to rural Virginia.
Before the tornado and then it comes through, or?
No. So the tornado was in Kansas. He started the blueberry farm in Virginia. And then he's written poetry. He wrote one novel, which was based on his great-grandmother's life in a town of 300 people in rural Pennsylvania. He just does what he wants.
I love it.
And so I feel like
that's the best way to live.
Your spirit is similar to that, which is why I'm excited about this. And also, I just really enjoyed reading your books.
Thank you.
I got to say that Shoot the Moon is not a book I would typically gravitate toward.
What pulled you to it?
The moon. But also a story about, I love stories about women. My favorite writers are Willa Cather, Eudora Welty, Wilma Dykeman. These are people that should be more known and are not. It's always fun when you connect on these lesser-known authors because then you're like, yes, I found another friend. But that particular part of the story, and I think that I know that you are drawn to those characters.
Absolutely.
But yeah, I've just had a blast reading both of the books. And so, to start, as I always do, I would like to give you your gifts.
Thank you very much.
So I have 3. I got carried away.
That's
2 of which are books, 1 is not.
Thank you.
But it'll make sense.
Okay.
So let's see. We'll do the first one. This.
Okay.
And if you've read it,
I will give it to a friend if I have. I'll pass the joy. Oh, I've never owned a copy. This is Song of the Lark by Willa Cather. I've never owned a copy of this.
But you have read it.
I have read it a long time ago. I ought to reintroduce
There was just too many parallels.
Yes.
I mean, we're talking about
this
like
makes me so happy.
A headstrong, confident young woman who will be stopped at nothing. It's performance, even though it's not theater.
Yeah.
With singing. Moonstone, Colorado. Right? And Cather obviously is always writing about her visits to the Southwest.
Yeah.
And so I just felt like, gosh, there's so much there that you would love.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm going to dive right into that one. You picked me right at a perfect time, too, where I really do need to find the next thing that I'm going to read.
That's good. That's why I always give gifts. You never know.
Lolly Willows or The Living Huntsman by Sylvia Townsend Warner. I do not know this.
Oh, my God. Thank you.
Do I get to be the first?
Okay,
This
so
is my first intro.
what's funny is I was over at Nowhere Bookstore.
It's my favorite store in town.
And they had Lolly Willows, and I told them, thank you. Because there are like hell and no bookstores out here that have this novel. So this is about a woman who is single in her 40s in England. And this is like early 1900s.
Yeah.
And when her father dies, she's essentially transferred to her brother and his family. Not as like a servant, but you know what I mean. Like you don't control your own destiny at that point. And then she up and just leaves for a remote village that ends up being a witch village.
Oh, very cool. This is up my alley too.
I mean, this protagonist you are going to adore.
Wonderful.
She is like hilarious too, because of like, you know, these types of characters that are bold and defiant are so good. I mean, Sylvia is so good at criticizing, subtly criticizing the culture of the time, and it applies now.
Yep.
But what I love about the book is it's not really antagonistic as much as it is hopeful for the people that want to live a life that is their own.
I love that.
And so it's a small book, but
it's good and lean,
you're going to want to immerse yourself in it. And so I just figured you'd love that character.
Thank you so much. These are perfect. It's really hitting me right on the home button. It's great.
So the last one is not a book. And it also might be irrelevant given the fact that cars now, if you have a newer one like me, don't have CD players. So see it as symbolic. Maybe.
I have so many cassettes and vinyls that I don't play because I just have them. This is so cool. Tell me about this.
So Kelly Smith is a songwriter out of rural Minnesota, north of the Twin Cities. I didn't even know about her when I lived in St. Paul, which makes this even better. But around the time I read Shoot the Moon.
Oh, so cool.
This came on my like Matt's radio on Apple Music, and I was just like, wait, okay, the title song, if Shoot the Moon were ever a movie, it has to be the theme song.
Okay.
It has to be. It was just, it's too perfect. So there's something about this album that I feel like, I don't know, you'll really enjoy. It's a good road trip album.
Yeah, I love driving music too.
And
I have, my car has a CD and I keep the same rotation of CDs in it whenever I remember to change them over. But this is great.
Well, what's cool about Kelly too is, you know, she wrote this, I think at like 40.
Wow.
And she had 4 kids. And this was her first album. So she did it by moonlight. She wrote it all at night. And so I was like, you know what? I hit her up. I was like, hey, can you send this down here?
Thank you very much.
Yeah. So I figured you'd like all those.
Thank you so much. Okay, this puts me on a perfect excitement path to talk to you about all my favorite things.
Yes,
this is great. Thank you.
Yeah. So
this is like the perfect way to juice the happiness.
I always feel like giving gifts is, I mean, it's how I like to spend my time. I mean, I work at a bookstore, so I'm always seeing books that come through that I'm like, oh, would my brother like this? Would my friends? And then I started giving gifts years ago with my first podcast. I was like, I'm going to make that a staple of this thing, because that's what it's about. It's about sharing.
Yeah.
And so the books that you give us, it's going to be cool when people find their way to these.
Yeah.
And I love when it illuminates a book or you know, give someone one that they also love. And so now they feel like, oh, I'm going to read your books too.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's really cool. And I'm really excited to be here.
Thank you so much for having me. I mean, this is making my day. I'm so glad.
So before we get to the books on the bed.
All right.
I am, as I said before we were even recording, I'm fascinated by people with what seem like disparate interests that all intersect. And, you know, I went back. First of all, are you a MySpace kid?
I was, absolutely. Yep.
So
you found an old photo. That's a very old photo.
So your ebook, your novella. I found this on on Amazon, and I was just like, you know what? We're going to be friends.
Yeah, that's like
this is like the most dramatic
first old bio. That's a very old bio.
Yeah. But you know, you're not an author who it seems like said, "Hey, this is just what I'm going to do." No. You are formerly a theater actor. It seems like you really like music, right?
Oh yeah.
And are you a sound engineer? Is that?
Yeah, dialogue designer.
Okay.
So I work in interactive media with narrative specifically. So that's anything from very literal story writing to making a bunch of different systems play nice with forward progression.
Okay.
It's a cool place to be in. It's a very uncharted territory now that's happening.
Of course it is.
Yeah.
So I'm really curious, though. One thing I love to ask folks, like I have a painter friend in Asheville who moved from London. He read a book about Alabama in London. This was back in the early 90s. He said, I'm going to go to Alabama today in the bookstore.
Yeah.
But literally then he moved to Alabama because he was fascinated by this Napoleonic exile colony.
Ah.
And so he ended up there, and then I met him through an event at the bookstore I work at before I worked there. And he came out with his debut novel. So he went from a painter to a novelist, and he still paints. But one of the things he said is that a good life is taking all of your disparate interests and bringing them together to make things that you just really want to make. So I'm curious how you feel like your diverse background
That's a good
in
question.
art and even just life, like the different places you lived, helps you when you're crafting these stories, because they're not stuck in one place in the slightest.
No, I don't like being told what to do. I thrive on structure, and I like having a directive, and I like feeling like, somebody has some sort of oversight either alongside or over top of what I'm doing at the brass tacks level. But by and large, when I look at the larger arc of life, I don't want that to be defined by anybody's choices except for mine. That's not freedom to me. That's not a truly boundless existence. And if you keep putting yourself in a box, or if you allow other people to put you in any kind of box, that just cuts off more and more of that choice forward. I always want to feel like there are many right choices. And I think the only way to do that is to listen to yourself and to take the time to really learn what you want. And that's a lifelong process. I feel like I only know still just a portion of who I am or what I want from the world. But I think that's the work. I think that's certainly why I write, is to discover more about myself and the world around me and how to connect with people. It's all communication at the end of the day. And it helps me to feel like I can draw from many different sources to make that picture. Like if I'm trying to figure out who I am and what I want, and I'm only looking at one source to define that, I may be trying to piece together concepts that are far more difficult to do from point A if I only turned around and looked at point B and figured, oh, there's the piece that I need. So it's leaving myself open to possibility and potential and really allowing the maybe to be okay. I don't always have to have the 0 or 1 answer. It's not binary, it's not black and white. There's that sort of third option that I'm always looking for that is just mine.
Gosh, I knew we were going to be friends. I mean, I could not have said it better, because I feel like that in some ways is why I honestly, you couldn't pay me to do this, because the minute somebody gets their hands on it, it's gonna be ruined. And granted, don't get me wrong, it would be nice to have some support, but it would have to be on my terms.
Yeah.
It is impossible. And so I'm curious, because we talked about the new book, The Unbecoming of Margaret Wolf.
Yes.
And the interesting reaction from people. But I think this is a good example of you making something that's your own.
It is.
And not fretting about the response to it, which that's another trend or theme, I suppose, in this project. I like authors who take risks.
Yeah.
Who are willing to accept the risk that maybe this falls flat.
That's a very good point.
But it is something I'm proud of. And so I'm curious how the creation of this book maybe animates how you feel about that idea of creating something that's your own and bringing all this together, regardless of, not writing to what you think these random people will love. I
like the verb animate for that, because I think you find life in surprising places when you go digging. And it's a book that I was writing at a time when I was doing a lot of self-figuring out. I was taking a lot of long, hard looks at myself in the mirror and asking myself, who am I? What do I want? What is my place on this rock? Which, those are questions that Margaret asks herself, and I think that's endemic of any interesting character to a certain extent, is always questioning things. but because it was this aspect of identity and belonging and really one's reason for even being here in the first place is something that Margaret struggles with, even accepting is a thing that she has to deal with, or accepting that she belongs. I think she struggles. The part of it that I think gives me the most ability to just sort of let the outside opinion slide off is that I'm so proud of where she ends up, because the journey for her from point A to point B is very messy and long and circuitous, and you know, she is the arbiter of that path. She makes choices that put her in the situations that she has to deal with. And it was the first time that I accepted the fact that, like, conflict is uncomfortable both on the page and in real life. And I struggled with writing conflict before this. I struggled with living in conflict for a long time. I still do. Like, that's I think it's conflict for a reason, right? But accepting that it will always be there and understanding that, you know, what is my stuff, for lack of a better term, to worry about or feel like I must have control over. And now on the other side of having written that and released it and let that end, now I think I have a much better concept for myself of what I want to have control over. And the control aspect of it, like, I leave the reviews at the door. That's not for me. I let sort of the chatter and the zeitgeist do what it will, because again, that's all bigger than me.
Yeah.
But writing that book helped me figure out what I wanted to hold and what I wanted to just leave aside. You know, what are the things that are interesting to me to examine and continue looking at and interrogating, really, in myself, in the people that I love, in the people that I dislike. Like, it's about everybody.
Yeah.
And it's a very personal book in the sense that you know, that makes it easier for me to sort of just live and let live. You know, I love that book, and nothing changes that.
And, you know, reading it, I always wonder when I dive into a book, am I going to know that this author had fun? Or like really enjoyed writing it and is proud of it.
Yeah.
And I can't say, that's obviously a personal opinion,
Sure.
but often I can tell when people did not enjoy writing a book.
Yeah.
Like, it just feels like not them.
Yeah.
But what's cool about this book is I just knew. I was like, this felt like maybe not an obvious next step for your writing, but it felt like you becoming an even greater version of the writer you want to be.
Thank you. I would agree with that. It was a book that needed to happen at the time that it did. It broke me out of so many different comfort zones, and it pushed me to take myself so much seriously than I think I've been prepared to before. And even I see it in reading back from here, having finished it. I've been hands off for almost a full year now. I haven't touched that book narratively, changing wise. So I'm a very different writer now, but I still find all of the points where I really pushed myself through certain bottlenecks of stylistic choice changes, or trying something new that I wasn't sure was going to land, but it did. And then you learn from that, or knowing, oh, here's the part where I had that scene that I loved, and then I ripped it out at the end of the day, and I think it still could have been better, but ... It's all of those what ifs or remember whens that are very obvious to me now from the hindsight. But it's fun because I'm able to see now in my current piece that I'm trying to drag across the finish line. It's almost there. We're so close.
Oh my God, I'm excited.
But that one is an even further iteration of understanding the concepts that I'm interested in turning over, and the ways that I feel able to push my characters through change.
So there's a language I'm going to steal from my friend Glennis Redmond, a great poet in South Carolina, just one of my heroes. She's so great. And because she, I feel like, gives people this freedom for themselves in just the way that she lives. And she's done it for so long. Yeah. And part of that, she said, when she was younger, especially in poetry, and she was a traveling, performing poet, a teaching poet, traveling the country to schools and different organizations. And so she had to be on stage, which I know you can relate to. And she's a force of nature, but just because that's what you see on the stage, right, it's not always what's going on inside. But she talks about finding or discovering or tapping into the unembarrassed self.
Ooh, yeah.
And
that's really what it's all about.
And I learned making, I made 5 hip hop albums. And now doing podcasts, I think so much of what stopped me from doing anything was being embarrassed.
Yeah, that's a real thing.
And worrying about how people are going to feel about me. But I care too much to not care.
Yeah.
And I don't care if people think that I'm crazy or that they make fun of me because I'm too intense or whatever. I love what I love, and I'm just going to express that. And so I haven't let that stop me. But
Right.
It's people like Glennis that you see that help you tap into that unembarrassed self. So I'm curious how writing this book maybe helped you tap into that unembarrassed
I like
self
that.
deep down.
To me, it's the exchange of knowledge, and it's through the exchange of language you learn. And writing a book is it's a dialogue with yourself. The act of drafting, the act of imagining and coming up with, these fantasies, because all fiction is a fantasy. It's a very important process of mine to check in with myself and to keep my own equilibrium. Really, is the intention and the care of, approaching myself at the mirror of the page and saying, what am I afraid of, or what am I obsessed with right now, or what is this curiosity that I just can't let go of? And in lieu of having a classroom to lecture to about it, or a captive audience of some kind at the end stage of it, the process of making, I've worked very hard to make the process of drafting in these very early stages of iteration. Everything is messy, everything is loose, everything is in that sort of free form stage of creation, and all of that becomes a way for me to test run all of these different realities, whether it's in the past, whether it's some future, whether it's a contemporary story. It's all things that are inherent to me that I'm able to sort of just throw in the mixer and see what happens. And it's a very self-soothing process.
Yeah.
And maybe soothing isn't always the right word, but it's an exploratory process that I started doing it when I was very young, and it really hit so many specific frequencies for me that it became kind of the only way that I understand how to make sense of the world, is to put it in a little diorama and let it run.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, I love that. Who do you feel like helped you find like that exploratory process? Not a lot of children.
Teachers.
Yeah.
I had really amazing teachers. My mother is an incredibly curious person. She's very in love with art. She studied art history. She has her master's degree, and she was very just loves books, loves art, loves sharing life with people. She's an incredible woman. So she's my biggest template for letting the world be a beautiful place.
Yeah.
And then I had teachers who were very keen on the things that interested me, and they were able to see that I was chasing rabbits down holes that the rest of my students weren't, or the rest of my friends weren't really kind of that intent on. So I had specifically a second grade teacher, Mrs. Orlando, a fourth grade teacher, Mrs. Cummings, and I had a music teacher, Mrs. Roberts, for about 12 years of my life.
Wow.
And there are others that I'm forgetting or leaving off because there are simply too many to name, but those 3 women in particular, plus my mother, they really tended in me a confidence in trying something out, and an ability to let kind of these intellectual pursuits, but not just intellectual, but very creative pursuits that were decoupled from any sort of little girls versus little boys should, et cetera, or, the rest of the class is at this level, so you're staying here. It was a very welcoming environment for me to just kind of play. And I had teachers who allowed me to play a lot with the material that I was given.
And I feel like being a child that chases these rabbits or is different than the standard that is set, if you don't have the right teachers, that can be a very oppressive environment.
And there are forks in the road that I can see looking back, that if I wasn't given the opportunity to, if I didn't have a trusted adult, the kind of kid that I was raised very Catholic, very conservative. The kind of kid that I was, I thrived on adult guidance. So I was always looking up to somebody else in the room.
Yeah.
And if I didn't have these teachers telling me, no, this is good, this is okay, keep exploring this. Oh, I'll give you, I'll tell you more about this composer. I had a choir teacher, Miss Clementi, who, like, my heart is forever with her. She's still alive. My God, she's not dead. I'm sorry. She's brilliant and wonderful. She's another one of the 4 plus my mom then. But these educators who were so able to, give me a safe space to kind of be weird and be different and not judge me for it or not try to wrist slap me. I was very, very lucky to have the amount of playground space that I did in multiple respects.
Yeah, well, and just thinking about the idea of a playground, I mean, we talked about the landscapes of Appalachia and especially New Mexico. Mm-hmm. And one of my favorite scenes in Song of the Lark is when she goes back to the old cliff dwellings.
Yeah. And
the line from Catherine always comes up is that, right, Thea was dreaming out her life from this small cleft in the world. Mm-hmm. And I'm curious about landscape and play and ideating, because the emptiness of New Mexico is what draws me to it.
Yeah.
In the same way that even though it's a little bit more contained, right, the mountains hold you together in Appalachia, there's still so much space. Yeah. It feels mysterious.
It's an old land.
And it's ancient, it's eerie. Old. And so, like, I think that's why that those polars to me are always connected, because you feel the weight of that ancient history. Yeah. It terrifies you and it excites you.
And it used to be, at least in New Mexico, it all used to be the bottom of the ocean.
I know.
And in the Appalachians, it was certainly the bottom of the ocean, but like billions of years ago. Those mountains are so old. Like, the joke is always like, oh, the Appalachians are the oldest, most grand mountains in the country, but they're so short. It's like, no, they're short because that's like an old man's teeth.
Well, and
that used to be.
Thank you for bringing this up. I'm not even a native Appalachian, but I am an adopted advocate for where I live, and particularly rural Appalachia, because that's where the stuff gets good. That's
where all the culture is. That's where the heart is.
Yeah, that's where everything tends to leave culture in terms of what we think of as dominant culture, and then it just becomes these pockets of, zaniness and just really interesting people all over the place, and I love it. It feels like a playground. But yeah, it's a good point. People say, "Oh, the Rocky Mountains are more beautiful." I'm like, what? Because they're bigger? So it tells me what you like, the tawdry things, right? You like the things that stand tall and make you
feel very, very tiny.
But
although the Appalachians still make you feel small, but in a cosmic sense.
But to me, if you can't see that, if you don't know how old those mountains are and you can't appreciate that, and instead you want the thing that's flashy, it says a lot about your character. I try not to judge people.
Oh, no, I would agree. Why let God have all the fun?
Yeah, exactly. See, sometimes I need to play them. But I'm curious how landscape, in particular, spending a lot of time in New Mexico, has also allowed you to stay open and maybe less inclined to follow rules. Or
that's a good point.
Standards, because that's why I moved to Appalachia. I had to let go.
Yeah.
I went to Michigan in Vanderbilt, and everything was suffocating. You got to do this. You got to live here. You got to look like this. You got to, I was like, God, I'm moving to the mountains. Yeah. There we go. And now all this that's happened since then,
exactly.
I was right. But it took that space. So I'd like to know where you stand on that and how that affected you.
Yeah, I always enjoy and connect most with fiction that allows the setting to be just as much a character as the people. And I think that's because I've spent so much time in places that have so much character in them. My mom grew up in Albuquerque. I've spent every summer out there basically visiting my grandparents. And the difference between the Virginia-isms of, you have the wetlands and the greenery and it's suburbia and all of that, and then going to a similar setting, on all counts on paper, it's the same place, but it's so different. It's still a street with houses on it, but, the air smells different. The quality of the light is entirely different. Yeah. The people are different. It was such a balm to me as a kid to know that there were different places out there. And my father is from Norway. He emigrated to the US in the 80s. So I would also spend some time in Norway and Europe visiting family over there that were still there. And that too was just this constant source of eye-opening understanding of, okay, I have my sphere, but also I know that there's this grander process happening with everybody else. It understanding that, the vastness of the world, whether on a physical scale or a metaphysical scale or both, it helps pull you out of yourself. And I think, unfortunately, this day and age, navel gazing is encouraged, and sort of falling down the rabbit hole is easy to do. But landscape and physically different places and physically experiencing a place, letting yourself engage with nature, be a tourist in your own city, be a tourist somewhere else, go travel. My husband has a tenet that the world is the world is not getting any larger, and in fact it's disappearing by the day, so you might as well see it while it's there. So it's remembering that everything is bigger than me, and remembering that there's more at play out there, I think ultimately just makes for more interesting stories, because that's real. It is real that weird shit happens. There's unexplainedness. There's mysteriousness. There's misinterpretation. The look of the place may be entirely different than the fact of the place, and in there is an interesting fact. So it's really just letting it be just as alive as the people that are in it.
And I love that about your stories, because it's the landscape, but then it goes even further. I mean, obviously we shoot the moon being the universe, and you play with time. But I feel like those landscapes that bring you into something bigger, that make you feel part of the whole, all, they lend you to think about time differently.
They do.
They offer you a chance to escape time in the way that we do it in cities, which is overwhelming and anxiety-inducing for me. You think about how many lights. When I go to work from my town, Franklin, to Sylva, North Carolina, I have one stoplight.
That's incredible.
And so from the edge of Franklin to the last right turn that I take, one stoplight.
You live in a magic place that is very rare.
and so it feels like I can take my time because there's not checkpoints all along the way. And then also I'm a gazer. So people don't like driving with me because I'm always looking side to side and up, and trying to oh my, but I think time feels different in the mountains. It feels different in the desert, in the sense 100%. That I guess you don't feel it as much, or maybe it becomes the construct of it. It falls away.
It does
in terms of modernity.
It becomes something older when you're out there.
And so I just love how you've, especially in Shoot the Moon, you're just let's really and anything, I love eternal recurrence. One of my favorite Netflix shows is Dark.
Oh, it's a good one.
But really anything that helps me or brings me into a story where it's just thinking about time, even if it sounds crazy, because
it's a resource. It's the only, well, not the only, but it is the most obvious resource that once it's spent, you don't get it back. You cannot, as much as the actual physic of it says, yes, technically you can travel backwards in time, light speed, et cetera, et cetera. Experientially, you can't. You cannot redo a moment that has been done. And I think that's something that I have personally struggled with a lot. That's brought me a lot of anguish and grief. But it's also been this incredible release the more that I've sat with that, specifically after writing that book. I think just by nature of getting older and seeing more of the world, it is just as much a beauty that you can't redo things as it is a pain. And accepting that it is both of those at once. I don't think I'm nearly spiritual enough to claim any sort of mastery over the concept of yin and yang, so I won't even touch that. But to acknowledge that it's the same principle. It's that I take great solace in the world being in sets of two, while also understanding that there's freedom in that third thing that I mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
It has to be, and it's more degrees of bothing, where it's both and both and both and. It's a very necessary way for me to live, I've found.
Yeah, and I think by embracing, I struggled with it. I mean, I think a lot of my depression came from, like, there's a great philosophy book that breaks down the 5 like big stages of philosophy, and it's by a French philosopher, Luc Ferry. And I read it at a really pivotal time. I was 25, and the idea that we're going to die is not something that I thought about ever, and I think actually caused me a lot of grief because as all those moments fell away, I realized I'd wasted them.
Were they're just spent differently?
Well, I think what I looked at is in reading that and understanding that, like, we would make different decisions if we had to live it all over again, over and over and over.
Yes.
I think about my death every day. This trip, I make calls of, like, should I go do this, right? How much time should I spend with this person? Will this stress me out? But I'm like, I could get cancer and die in 3 years, and I know that sounds extreme, but it allows for me to have less regret.
Of course.
And so I don't ever look back for this lost paradise because I feel like I've lived it well.
Good for you. Yeah,
and I don't get anxiety about the future as much because I feel like I love my now. Mm-hmm. And so if you can grapple with those, the past that you think was always better, it's like, maybe, but I can also do that now.
For sure.
Like, I can keep doing those things that I miss but don't miss.
Yeah.
Like, there's a different kind of longing. I look back and I'm happy something happened, but I don't feel like that life is over. Mm-hmm. It's just I'm constantly creating that in new ways.
Yeah. That's a much better way of looking at it, I think. And I have a knee-jerk reaction often if somebody says something like, or any sort of negativity, or I hesitate to call it negativity, but any kind of view that is not entirely optimistic. My knee-jerk is always like, oh, it's not that bad. Like, in so much as my mother is the amazing and wonderful force that she is for me, there's also, she's so practiced in positivity that was the only way for me to understand things for such a long time. And there was a break point whenever I truly had to engage with something on a very ugly reality level. And I couldn't do it, but eventually, circling back to the idea of, accepting that the wildness and the chaos of all of it is kind of the point, like that was really hard for me to accept. And I'm lucky enough to have hitched myself to somebody who's really good at living with that and has taught me a lot of ways to settle into the acceptance of not knowing the answer to what comes next. Yeah, and that being okay.
One of my favorite quotes from one of my favorite shows, finding peace in not knowing seems strangely more righteous than the peace that comes from knowing. And I live by that. And I try to control less. Yeah. And I leave myself open to the fact that it might happen how I think it is going to happen, or at least close to it. It might not, but it could be better. Yeah. And even if it is worse, next up.
It makes sense that you connected with Shoot the Moon so much.
Right? And the thing is, what I love about this and what I love about being here together is, like, it feels like one of those moments where I'm like, how did this even happen?
I know, yeah.
I had not heard of you. Like, I just randomly found you online, and I read a book that, again, I just typically wouldn't go to, and then I just felt like I wanted to read it again right after it was done.
Oh, thank you.
It's sticking with me, and it will, I think, forever. And I knew it was because it came from, like, it had to be a person that I would want to know that wrote that book. Yeah. But yeah, there's so many themes in that and even in your new book with Margaret Wolf of, someone grappling with changing and becoming themselves and shedding old selves, and, like, the chaos though is inevitable.
It is, and that's the idea of kind of the central figure of the struggling protagonist. And my editor and I have talked about this, where it's like, this is kind of the seed that we're working with now for a little while. Like, it's I hesitate to call it a calling card or a brand, because I think that cheapens it. But I had a professor in college who said that every great composer only wrote about 3 or 4 pieces of music in their life. Like, they obviously tons and tons of opuses, but when you really analyze them and you really look at the thematic material and the instrumental material and the things that they were interested in turning over creatively, there's really only a couple pillars throughout a creative life. And the thing that I'm interested in exploring right now, I think, is transformative processes of some sort. It's the discovering, the becoming, the unshouldering of the expected in lieu of what one charts for themselves. And I think it's a very interesting time at large to be doing that, because I think identity and belonging and kind of a one's sense of home is something that a lot of people are grappling with right now. And kind of the feeling of who is really looking after me and who can I consider my neighbor or not. That, I think a lot of people are asking those questions. And so there is a kind of a genesis of questioning, I guess, and maybe, but that's not the right term. I lost my train of thought.
That's okay.
Sorry.
Something you said reminded me of an article you wrote that reminded me of Willa Cather, hence Song of the Lark, although this one came from O Pioneers. Had you read that book?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
You know the quote then. There are only 2 or 3 human stories.
Yeah.
Right? They go on.
Exactly.
Exactly. As fiercely as if they never happened before. Mm. And you wrote that article about your interest in, like, all of these stories are technically the same. There's only so many we can write.
There's Jung has his archetypes, Western canon does what it does. You look at the things that are preserved throughout time. One of the books that I have here is the H Playbook by Anne Carson, which is her translation of Heracles.
Do you want to just roll into it?
Yes, I would love to.
I love when it naturally happens. So let's talk about this.
This would be great.
Because this is cool.
Yeah, Euripides is one of my favorite poets. He was writing 5th century BC, so around over 2,000 years ago. But his stories are reliably so real, and he handles concepts like grief, infidelity, the death of your children, the loss of your legacy, like all of these very vivid feelings that we still see coming up time and time again, every headline, every hit, anything. It's the same concepts, and Anne Carson is a Canadian translator who has done incredible work and just has an eye for the weird that I don't see often. Like, she's one of those writers, talk about somebody that you read on the page who think, I resonate so deeply with so much of this, like we must be sharing some kind of vein somewhere. She specifically, she doesn't do it in all of her work, much of it, not all of it though, but there's a very tactile nature to all of it. I know, H Playbook here is, it's a long book, so it's horizon shape. It almost looks like a photograph book, but she's hand drawn and hand typed and then collaged the entire play. And
come on,
I know.
How great.
There's crayon drawing. It's so funky. It's very House of Leavesy almost, Danielewski-ish. And the story is of Heracles. It's a veteran who comes home from war and he snaps and he kills his wife and children. And then his friend comes and says, "Hey man, what happened?" And it's an exploration of grief and PTSD and think of something that feels very modern, post-traumatic stress disorder. 2,000 years ago, we still had war. We arguably had more war then than we do now. And obviously people would still be coming home with those ailments. And so it's an exploration of these very human conditions, and Anne Carson has language. There's a bit at the end here. I'm going to spoil a very, very old play for you if you don't know Heracles.
That's their fault.
I know. He doesn't kill himself at the end, which is shocking for a Greek tragedy. But there's a great exchange between Heracles and Theseus at the very end, where usually at the end of a tragedy, you'd maybe have your main guy go on about, here's all the agonies that I went through, listen to my labors, I go, I die, and exit stage left. But there's an amazing, in the the base text of the play, it's a very simple conversation. It's Heracles and Theseus going back and forth. Heracles wants to kill himself. Theseus says, no, I'm not going to let you do that. But the way that it's set up on the page here is great, where you have Heracles and Theseus speaking. So Theseus is kind of teasing him and saying, like, this is you, the hero of mankind. And Heracles is saying, no, it's not me. I'm just luck. Mankind didn't care for me. And Theseus says, you mean your luck ran out? And Heracles says, luck? Luck. Let me tell you about luck from day one. And there's a dash. And then Theseus interrupts him and says, stop. Don't rehearse the labors. They're legend. It's over. We're over. And he goes into a beautiful monologue about how, wash your hair, take in the laundry. Let's go. Come on. Sorry, the wash your hair, take in the laundry is a more extended metaphor that ends with, I'm just saying, you call those men gods and they call you walking ash. So it's a seizing of, you don't have to serve these systems that seek to destroy you, and come back from this life that you thought was over, and reintegrate yourself with the world and do it pissed off until you're not pissed off about it anymore. And it's a very affirming text, and through her words, she has experienced immense grief in her own life, and she's able to sublimate it into her words. She's got an incredible mind for connecting words across language. It's stunning. She's amazing.
Oh my gosh, what a great first pick.
Thanks.
I feel like this was right on brand.
Oh, I'm so glad.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, and translation has been coming up a lot lately. Mm-hmm. Something that I think maybe I've been sleeping on. The importance.
It's so huge in the things that I like reading, because so much of what I read is theater and poetry, and a lot of theater and poetry is either so old that it, English didn't exist when it was set in stone, quite literally. Yeah. Or it's from somebody who isn't from America or England, but the ideas that they have are so forceful and true that, somebody looks at and says, I don't even speak this language, but other people, or I speak this language and I know that this truth is so integral to humanity that I must share this with other people. I must translate into my tongue or this other tongue that I know. It's an expression, translation is an expression of love, in my opinion. And I think that I don't speak other languages very fluently. I can stumble my way through Italian, and I can understand Spanish when it's spoken to me more and more regularly nowadays. I'm practicing. But I have great respect for somebody who can have both feet equally in one language and another, to the extent that they can put the stories through the same process.
You are the only person so far that has been part of Books on the Bed that reads a lot of theater. Really? And so I am curious, and maybe in hopes that people take some. So while you're talking about this, also telling people why you keep going back to theater. I mean, literally, I don't know. Yeah. Anybody else that would read theater this much. And so that's why I was really, really excited, because I knew it would be a part of this. Yes, and it's going to give listeners something that we haven't had before. Great. So what's the next one?
Okay, so this next one is a graphic novel. It's the omnibus edition of P. Craig Russell's The Ring of the Nibelung. Look at this. So I know. Cool. It was a series that was published by Dark Horse throughout the 1990s and early 2000s. It was a very, very, very long publication. This is the big chunky, all the issues bound together in one, full color. And I wrote a thesis paper on this book when I was in college.
Of course you did.
Because it is the graphic novelization of Richard Wagner's Ring cycle operas. And Richard Wagner himself was a total asshole. I will be the first person to say that. He was the worst kind of person. And the music that he wrote was very grand and ostentatious. And it was meant to be performed exclusively on his stage in Germany called Bayreuth. And it was meant to be like this Garden of Eden of opera in the late 19th century. But the stories that he drew from to write the Ring cycle are very, 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 very old Norse mythology. And I'm half Norwegian.
Yeah, so I was going to say.
I have a huge affinity for Norse myth, and specifically their creation myths. It's so involved. There's so many parallels with Christianity because all of the roots of those stories are mixed up in the Viking raids that were happening in the 11 and 1200s, even earlier than that. But back to the specifics of this one, the ring cycle is basically a combination of the creation myth and sort of a moral play about don't be evil and don't be overambitious and like don't put the ring on Frodo, don't do it. And again, like also it's the same mythology that inspired the Lord of the Rings by J.R.R. Tolkien. So it's just specifically the graphic novel though is this, it's a deeply American interpretation of a really, really, really old European story. And it's such a great joining of the two of them because comic books are such a specifically American medium, and my father is an artist and my sister is a comic book person and she's an artist, so it's really ingrained in me for such a long time. But at the height and sort of my favorite part of this book is that visually P. Craig Russell as the designer and the artist of all of the pages, he has used a system that Wagner and his contemporaries were very interested in called leitmotif usage, where it's tunes. And drawing Lord of the Rings, imagine the Peter Jackson movies, you hear the Ring theme is the da na 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 na. Yeah. That lick comes up whenever the Ring is on screen or somebody's talking about it. In the Ring cycle operas by Wagner, hundreds of tunes and phrases and little little instrumental winks that are, oh, that's Brunhilde, oh, that's Odin, that's, all the different characters have their own leitmotifs. And if you close your eyes and listen to the music sans singers, you still get the same story. It's all soundtracked. It was Hollywood soundtracking before Hollywood. Like,
that's incredible.
Yeah, exactly. And unfortunately, talking about Wagner is such a minefield because he was just such an asshole. Yeah. But this book, P. Craig Russell is the artist, and Mason, Kandersky, and Showman are the other artists who did lettering, coloring, and lines. It's just,
and that looks freaking awesome.
Yeah, it was fun. The paper that I wrote in college was very long. And my professor is a saint for reading all the way through.
So for what program was this a thesis?
I have my bachelor's in composition. So it was an opera history class that we had a capstone paper about, pick one of the operas that we talked about this year and connect it to something else.
This sounds crazy, but I've read lots of theses and dissertations for this, and I am kicking myself that I did not find this.
It's fun. It was good. I found it. It was in New York visiting a friend, and I went to an indie comic shop that was stuffed in the middle of some third floor walk up somewhere. I can't remember where it was, but it was right on the shelf, and I was like, I need a thing to read on the train. And halfway back to Philadelphia on the train, I emailed my professor and I was like, can I change my topic, please? He was like, yeah.
Those are the best accidents.
Yeah.
That is crazy.
Yeah, it was great.
But hey, I think this is where breaking the algorithm and wandering and exploring, one of my favorite things to do is just walk and say, I wonder what's going to happen today.
Me too.
So what do you got for the next
one? The next one I have is my favorite novel of all time is The Charioteer by Mary Renault. My edition is a very precious first edition that I bought for myself after Margaret Wolf. I signed my contract and then I said, okay, great.
Heck yeah.
We got number 2. What are you going to do? You're going to buy a first edition of your favorite book. It is a surprisingly modern story. It was written in the mid-1950s. I don't remember the exact publication date, but it's older than my mom, so it's older than 58, because I remember that's something that still cracks me up, is that this book that I'm so obsessed with is very, not of my time. But it is about a young soldier in World War II. He's British, serving, his name is Laurie. He serves at Dunkirk, and gets his kneecap shot off. It's very messy. He gets, ferried back to British soil in the Merchant Marine rescue that happened. You see the movie Dunkirk, it's a kind of that slice of the story. Similar intention there. But Laurie is put in a military hospital in a very small town, and it was such a mess that a lot of miscommunication, lots of people think that he's dead, but he manages to tell his mother that he's okay, makes friends with his bedmates. Whole time, he's somebody who's struggling with his sexuality. He went to a boys' school. So he is in his early 20s and sort of coming into his own sense of self, of life. He's been let free from his post. He's very aimless. And it develops, the story develops him into a love triangle between himself, one of the orderlies at the hospital who's very young and naive, and Laurie tells himself doesn't have any idea of what kind of the sexual aspect of being attracted to another man would be. Yeah. And then there's the third point in the triangle, which is Laurie's old school friend, Ralph, who was one of the mariners who rescued him during the beach, who thinks Laurie is dead until they meet at a party. It's so modern. It's so fresh. Crazy. It's so contemporary. The author is a woman named Mary Renault. She was a nurse during World War II, so she served in several hospitals, and that was her life's career alongside her writing. And she, she was a lesbian in the 50s, for her whole life, but specifically when she was the age of the characters that she was writing about. It was an underground thing, and Renault has a lot of ideas that you see on the page of what she thinks of contemporary queer culture, and she tends to have a really nose turned up attitude over all of it, which comes through very clearly. And honestly, I should backpedal a bit and say I don't know what of that I infer through the characterization of Laurie as kind of a little bit of a lush. He's a wonderful character. He's so sympathetic, but he is a little bit stuck up. He's kind of a bitch, and that's why we like him. But I don't know how much of his attitude towards sort of quote unquote the other set, which is the more openly queer folk, which are the little bit more effeminate, the men who shack up with other men. And Laurie tends to look down on those kinds of lifestyle choices because he's been raised or he has come up in a society that has such specific, strict viewpoints of what masculinity is. But both Ralph and the orderly Andrew challenge his ideas of what either end of the coin mean. And there's this beautiful metaphor in it of the charioteer, which is from a Plato text about the charioteer who has to drive the two horses. One of them is the white horse and one of them is the dark horse. And it's the sort of the pure, quote unquote, platonic love, and then there's the erotic love. So it's the white horse and the dark horse. And it's it's one's responsibility to understand how to drive the chariot with both of those in control. And I think that there's many different, I guess for lack of a better term, brands of queerness that one could apply to the characters in the story. But to me, it reads as a very sympathetic bisexual allegory. And that's very important to me. And it's sort of the first book that I really and sort of saw my own attitudes on the page. So I read it for the first time in high school and not in high school, in college. It was my sophomore year of college. And immediately I was like, this is my book.
It feels like book. If there was any book on the bed for you to choose, especially given how it relates to your novels.
Mm-hmm. It's about, making choices. It's about looking at your desires and looking at what the world is giving to you and deciding what you want with it or from it and for yourself. So, yeah.
And that's what a good book helps us think about.
It does.
And I'd say I was late to the game in reading queer narratives in general.
I was so hungry for them so early. It was just like, I don't know why I want these, but I do. But it's cool.
You finally get there,
exactly.
And now you're writing those stories,
yes.
And so you're helping this legacy live on and doing it in your own way, and that's really exciting.
It is exciting. I think exciting is the perfect term for it because it's easy to feel like, I'm doing something that's so important. Sure, writing books is important, but at the end of the day, all I'm trying to do is communicate with people. It doesn't have to be more than that.
And you're doing a good job.
Thank you very much. That makes me happy.
Yeah, oh my gosh, that's incredible. So I see we got two here.
We got two here that kind of go together. So these are both nonfiction books. One of them is The Study of Counterpoint, which is from a text called Gradus ad Parnassum, which is really old. This is another translated text by a man named Alfred Mann, who does a lot of music academia. And this is the first book that a very dear professor of mine told me to buy the summer before I started studying with him. And this is sort of a handbook about the basics of a principle called counterpoint, which is in music composition. It exists in other disciplines. It exists in painting and visual art and architecture, but specifically in music, it means the interplay between multiple voices of melody. So if you think you have one voice singing, that's a solo. If you have two instruments playing, that's a duet. And anytime you have more than one voice happening at the same time, the way that their notes weave in and out of each other for, consonance or dissonance, that has implications on the music that we have predetermined feelings about at a very chemical level. Yeah. So this is a really old text. What is it? It's the text was first written in 1725. Oh my gosh. It was sort of the handbook that Bach and his contemporaries used to write their music.
Wow.
And it's very mathematical stuff that is written as a dialogue between teacher and student.
Is that your red pen?
It's my red pen.
Oh my god!
I have marked the shit out of this book.
I love that.
Yeah, but it was a very eye-opening text to me when I was younger because it made such a dry concept very digestible. It starts out as the teacher and the student. Yeah, Josephus and Aloysius. Those are the two. And Josephus says, "I come to you, venerable master, in order to be introduced to the rules and principles of music. You want then to learn the art of composition? Yes." And then it starts you into the textbook, and you're just sort of it's almost like the script to one of those 1950s now we meet the body, that kind of
that's so great.
Animated thing. That's what this feels like to your brain when you're walking through it. And kind of on the opposite side of the same coin is a book called The Art of Writing Nonfiction by Andre Fontaine, who was a journalist. He passed away, I think, in the 1990s, but he was very widely regarded in the 60s and 70s. He was a professor, and he was a journalist, had his beat, and then taught for a long time, and this was his textbook. The pursuit of truth is something that I care a lot about. It's not a skill that I had for a long time. I sort of had to get to a point where I understood what I even wanted my truth to be, or sort of how to look for objective truths in the world. And journalists are really good at that, or journalists ought to be really good at that. And this is a 50-year-old text that is all about how to ask people questions and how to construct a story and how to do your due diligence in observing the world. And it's a textbook. It's a kind of a pick it up and put it down, read a chapter half at a time. But he writes so incisively, and the way that he kind of trains you to look at text in new ways is astounding. I love this book.
I always love when people who write a certain genre can say, hey, actually, this thing that people see as an opposite really applies.
Yeah.
So having these nonfiction books as important, instructive devices for your novels.
If all I read is fiction, then the only where's my scaffolding? I have less footing in true reality in that, and I don't say that to intend that fiction is a non-helpful pursuit. Not at all, because obviously I write them, but I think that if you're constantly relying on one kind of well to fulfill you, then how are you going to grow? You have to sort of push and pull and try things that might surprise you. And if you hate it, you can stop.
Right, yeah. But I mean, the point is you
have to try.
To explore, anything can fall off. You can drop it. But I love that word surprise. But something that you said about truth reminded me of James McBride did an examination of James Brown's life. And because James McBride does not consider himself a novelist. Really? He considers himself first and foremost a musician. He teaches music to children at the church his parents founded in Brooklyn, New York. Okay, so that's why I love James McBride. That's why I knew we were going to get along, is because the way we define ourselves And it's really interesting how then self-definition comes into play.
Yeah.
So many people like you would want to be considered a novelist, just a brilliant, daring novelist. But I like people who are uninterested in that label. And anyway, so now James McBride goes on another tangent with this James Brown book, which I didn't know he wrote until years after I read his novels. And I forget who said the quote, but at the beginning of that book, there's a quote that says something along the lines of, if you're not interested or if you're not pursuing truth, you shouldn't be playing music.
Yeah. There's a quote that I am still deciding whether or not I want to use as an epigraph in number 3.
Big choice.
I know, and I'm sure that it's going to be game time decision as it always is. It's like, final, we're going to the printer. 2. But it's, God, I might fumble this, but there's, I can't remember his name. There's an arrangement of J.S. Bach's Fugue in G minor that there was a jazz arrangement done of it, and the Mercury executives were like, this is great, we can't sell it, we're going to shelve it, but somebody has a preserved mono version of it on YouTube. I'll send you the link, I'll email it to you so you have it, but the liner notes in it say, there is no shortcut to immortality, this is the shorthand of genius. That's what it is. That was music. And that's yeah.
That's so good.
Isn't it great?
That would be a good
epigraph. I know. It's in the draft. I haven't moved it yet.
I have no idea what you're writing about, but
it's a Western. I'll leave it at that.
Yes. So cool.
So
what do we got for number 6?
This is the last one. This is The Boy, the Mole, the Fox, and the Horse by Charlie McKeese or Makesy. I'm sorry if I'm saying his name incorrectly. But this is a children's book. It's very digestible and short and small, but it is full of pen and ink drawings and handwriting.
So good.
Some of them are black and white. Some of them are, sorry, I'm really close to the mic. Some of them are black and white. Some of them are color. But by and large, it's a very simple story about a little boy who's going on an adventure with a mole, a fox, and a horse. And my dad is an artist, and when I was a kid, pen and ink was his medium. So the visuals of this are very, very calming for me and make me happy and make me think of him.
Yeah.
And my mom got this book for me after a pretty tumultuous couple of years in our family, but ultimately, I think she had this book on her coffee table, and I read it one time when I was visiting amid some of the craziness. And the next Christmas, she got it for me. She was like, she got it for me for Christmas after I had bought it for myself. And I was like, oh, Mom, I didn't tell you I already got this for myself. She was like, oh, it made me think of you. And so it's one of those coincidence books that I connected with it. And then somebody picked it up and said, oh, I think this would connect with her, and gave it to me. And it's a moving book, and anytime I pick it up and look through it, it makes me think of both my parents. So it's a fun, it's a cute story, and it's like, it's a children's book. It's about an adventure it's an animal book, but the whole process of it is about this little boy not knowing what comes next and sort of allowing himself to be taken into the wilderness by these animals that he trusts. And it's so simple and it's so sweet, and the art is so beautiful. So this one is very important.
I love that. And I love ending on a children's book.
Yeah.
And I love when people choose them.
Me too. My public library around the corner from my house, and the cellophane covered picture books stacked sky high every 2 weeks. That was my heaven. That was the best place to be.
Because there are still so many relevant things from these books that I think adults forget.
Absolutely.
And if we can tap in to what we learned as children, ironically, a lot of our adult problems can at least be eased, if not solved.
Yeah.
Because kids and I was talking about this with Naomi yesterday, because so much of her poetry was working with kids in schools. And we were just talking about how wonderful children are because of their innate curiosity, their lack of a filter, right? The fact that they are not yet old enough to be embarrassed about a lot of things.
I have a niece who is almost 2. She's, I think, 1.5 now. And she is getting speech now and very excited about it. She has like basic sign language that my sister-in-law taught her as an infant through toddlerhood. And now she's getting her words. And she, learning to say my husband's name, how to say my name, how to say my sister-in-law's name, my brother-in-law's name, and watching the connections happen. And I don't have any children of my own, but I love children. And I love how free they are, and I love how boundless everything is to them. The world isn't this oppressive, strange place for them yet. It's new, and it's big, and it's exciting, and they don't know how to be disappointed.
Or, they're all so fearless.
They're very fearless.
Their
bones don't break.
That's what I'm saying. They're jumping on shit. They're going into dark places where I have no idea what's awaiting them, but they're brave.
Exactly. Yeah, children are very brave. And I think I take a lot of solace in remembering periods of my own childhood where I was being brave without even recognizing it. And those are times where I like to hold those close, and I think it's very important to remember that. I love children's books. I think it's important for adults to keep children's books on their shelves.
Man, I love this stack.
Thanks.
As I said, I had no idea where this was going.
Thank you very much.
And I was surprised by these. Yeah, I'm always surprised when no one else has picked them. And that's why, even though you sent me the photos, I couldn't look.
That's good.
But I just feel like it's so cool to see how these books,
they come together, they stack you up.
And they're part of you.
Exactly.
And I see what you're talking about in your stories.
Yeah.
And it's always fun to make sense of the writers that are across from you by looking at these books. And I'm just like, you're a really, really good writer.
Thank you so much.
And you're a delightful person.
Thank you so much. That makes me happy.
And it is fun to meet people whose work I admire and whose lives I admire. I learn a lot from you all.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I think that's why I keep reading.
Being able to share is the joy of all of this. It's like the writing and the process and the publication and I'm holding it in my hands. That's great, but it's the connection, it's the moments, it's sort of the shoulders that you glance moving through life to say, hey, you said that in a way that made a lot of sense to me. And that, I think, is rarer than people think. And it's important that we're able to recognize it when it comes across. So I'm happy to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
I don't think we could end on a better note.
Perfect.